At Sixth Sense Spa and Nail Lounge, our focus is to provide you with excellent customer service in a planet-friendly atmosphere. So we believe in consulting you with what way we can provide the best services and products so when you leave Sixth Sense, you feel the best you can be. Pamper yourself at one of our 3 fully licensed locations. Go to Sixth Sense Beauty, 6, the number 6, sensebeauty.com to book now. Welcome to Touch Podcast. I am Mike Wixon, and right there is Tom Byfoot. Of course, he is the publisher of Dutch the Magazine and the Grand Poobah at Mokum Publishing, and the host of Dutch the Podcast. Hi, Tom. Nice to see you.
Hi, Mike. It's been a while. Good to see you again.
Yeah, it seems like forever, and for good reason. Both of us took the summer to do outrageous things. Yours was move clear across the country, and that was full of adventure along the way, and very interesting. Congratulations on your move to the west coast of Canada, Tom.
That's great. Yeah, I'm back in beautiful British Columbia. On the west coast of Canada, a place where we started our Canadian journey, as I think I told you in a few episodes ago. And it's just wonderful to see the mountains again. Strange for Dutchmen to like mountains, but I just love them.
Oh, well, you know what? Honestly, what's in your view is in your heart often. And so I hope that leads to great peace and tranquility and a lot of adventure. Speaking of which, you traveled. How did you make your way across Canada?
Well, I actually drove, and to be fair, I crossed the border into Michigan.
Okay.
Drove to a place called Muskegon, Michigan, and of course, there's going to be Dutch connections. There's Dutch connections everywhere. So Muskegon is the place where a lot of Dutch immigrants in the 1800s boarded a ferry to go across the Great Lakes, go across Lake Michigan, and ended up in Pella, Iowa, that we talked about before.
Yeah.
I took a ferry from Muskegon across to Milwaukee. And then, of course, you start driving through the country and you pass a place called Orange City, which was founded by Dutch settlers. And I even went to a place, I'm from Amsterdam, right, in the Netherlands, or at least I spent most of my formative years in Amsterdam. There's a place in Montana called Amsterdam, so I had to go visit. Now, Amsterdam, the Netherlands, is the capital of Holland. You've been there, you enjoyed it. It's a great city. Amsterdam, Montana has 181 population. So it was a little bit ambitious to call it Amsterdam. I still went there. They've got a windmill, they've got a Dutch meat shop, and they've got a little Dutch street with little Dutch row houses. It was just fascinating to see that. Then we kept driving and eventually crossed the border into British Columbia. And I'm here in a place called Cranbrook.
Oh,
Cranbrook
beautiful.
In the East Kootenays, foothills of the Rocky Mountains, beautiful area. And I even met some Dutch people here. Would you believe it?
I'm not surprised. I mean, you probably just made your way into Vancouver before you were being flocked by the Dutch community. But in fact, already you've tapped into the Dutch culture in Vancouver. Tell me about this.
Yeah, isn't it amazing?
You
We're
have a
recording
knack,
this.
Tom. You have a knack for this. There's no doubt about it.
I got in touch with a group called I've got to get this right. The Dutch Cultural Association of British Columbia. And we're talking to two of their principals, two of their founders, Irwin Oostindie and Vanessa Timmer. Irwin may be known to some people because he is actually the main character in a story in a Dutch graphic collection of Dutch graphic short stories.
Wow.
But he is also the driving force, or one of the driving forces behind this BC Dutch, or Dutch BC as they're known.
Very cool. All right. Now this not-for-profit, very active. On the day we recorded this, I believe that they had a movie festival. They have a street market. You'll hear all about it, but this is one very active group, and not just in the community, but even behind the scenes, trying to keep that Dutch connection with Canada vibrant.
Absolutely, and they're bringing it into the 21st century, if you can put it that way, and that's fascinating. You know, they're looking at it in a different way, but I don't want to steal their thunder, so let's listen to them first, and then we can always look back on that a little bit.
All right, let's meet your new friends in BC, Tom.
Okay, we're talking to Vanessa Timmer and Irwin Oostindie of the Dutch Cultural Association of British Columbia. Welcome to Dutch the Podcast, both of you.
Hello, Tom.
Thank you so much for having us. Bedankt.
Yeah, bedankt. Thank you so much for joining. Irwin and I got in touch a few weeks ago. Irwin told me there's some really exciting things going on in the Dutch community in British Columbia. And I'd like to start maybe with a very open question. Can you tell us about the Dutch in BC and about Dutch BC in general?
Well, it's a huge province. We're out on the West Coast, so geographically we figured that out. But what we haven't figured out exactly is the visibility and the profile of the Dutch community. And it's roughly 3% of the population, so it's a very, very significant immigrant community. It's a major powerhouse, huge impacts on agri-tech, on farming sectors, but also very incipient in all parts of the economy and all parts of culture in British Columbia. Many people think about us as being assimilated, or that the Dutch typically distribute and make themselves at home. I think there's some historical truths there. But what's interesting for younger people, when they're knowing that their oma or their opa is van Nederlands, they don't really know what that means for them when they're Dutch in British Columbia. So we're trying to solve that question.
And do you think that's still relevant for let's say the kids and particularly the grandkids of those 1950s, 1960s immigrants?
Well, I think Vanessa and myself are truth to that it is relevant, because I mean, I grew up, my parents are, my father's passed, but my mother is still alive, and they never became Canadian citizens. So landed immigrants. Dutch was my first language, and I'm in my 50s. And so I think there's a situation where the children of those immigrants, we're all wanting to participate in the community in the way that we understand the community. And many of us are fortunate enough to retain connection to Nederlands, and through our work, through our studies, of course, family connections. So all of my family is in Nederlands, except my brothers and our children. So for us, it's very meaningful. And then we're also looking at the 20-year-olds and the 30-year-olds, both who have immigrated for work to Canada or to British Columbia to work in the Vancouver tech community or other parts of the sector, economy, or people who are in their 20s and they're trying to understand their role in the world. And they don't see, we don't have a Dutch cultural center, so we lack that infrastructure that many other immigrant communities have. So there's lots of work for us to do, and it's an ironic situation because we are such a large part of the community, but we don't have that kind of cultural infrastructure that many of the other communities do.
That's interesting. Yeah. So Vanessa, your perspective on that.
Well, Tom, I was just going to say that Irwin and I know each other because of the Dutch connection. So as Irwin's mentioning, both of us were born, actually, I was born here in Vancouver to Dutch parents. My parents actually weren't part of the 1950s sweep. My dad came out in 1968 to the Netherlands, or to Vancouver from the Netherlands. He'd studied architecture at Delft University. And in 1965, he hitchhiked across the United States with his best friend Fritz, ended up in San Francisco and fell in love with the West Coast. So when he was looking at what to do after the university years, he ended up arriving in 1968 and also had to look for work and find his way, and ended up becoming an architect here in Vancouver. And then he wrote to my mom, who he dated in Delft, said, come visit. And she came out in 1970 and fell in love with my father again and with Vancouver. And I was born here in 74, my sister in 73, Dagmar. And they actually did reconnect with the Dutch Canadian community here and spent time also as part of something called CANS, which was a Canadian Advancement of Netherlandic Studies, this association that was bringing people who brought lectures about Dutch history and kind of a social group, as well as a group that really wanted to exchange knowledge about the Netherlands, bring people over from the Netherlands. And that's how they met Irwin's family, Nellie, his mom, and his dad, and also always encouraged me to connect with Irwin. They said, get to know Irwin. He's doing such interesting work. And so a few years ago, Irwin did reach out to me. We'd known each other, but he said, our parents' generation is getting older, and how do we pick up the mantle and really continue making connections across Canada to the Netherlands, and to really explore our Dutch roots and our connections in honor of all those years that they've been doing that as well.
Yeah, and you're trying to basically reinvent it for the younger generation, I guess. I'm going to quote from an email that Irwin sent me. And he said, Dutch BC is reimagining how we can connect with the 99% of the Dutch community in British Columbia not involved in traditional Dutch organizations' activities. So that's a very clear statement of purpose. How are you trying to reach, or how are you going to reach that 99%? Because the 1% we don't have to worry about, right? They're involved, they're committed, they'll come to events. How are we going to reach the other 99%? I think it's probably a little less than 99%. Probably got more commitment than 1%, but still.
Well, in terms of the numbers, if there's 75 to 80,000 people, 1% is still a significant number who are participating.
That's true.
But 2 or 3%, sure. We're looking at using the law of attraction. I think that's the most important thing, is having something to offer community members, younger people who want to connect and know that they're Dutch, but don't see opportunities to connect in the Nederland, in British Columbia. So that means they might be interested in DJ culture, but the Dutch community doesn't offer them that type of cultural activity. In Nederland, of course, we know DJ culture is a massive global export. The biggest cultural figures, some of the biggest cultural figures in the world, are not 17th century Dutch painters. They're 21st century Dutch DJs making millions of dollars, traveling around and filling up the venues in Vancouver to sold out crowds, right? So can we connect with that Dutch DJ and say, hey, can you come on the side and let's have a conversation about electronic music? Well, a few hundred Dutch British Columbians fit that demographic perfectly. So if we actually offer that opportunity for them to connect with Dutch DJ culture, that's meaningful for them. And so it's about thinking about what do people actually want to experience in what it might mean for them.
And when we first started, we actually went out and did a big survey. So we had about 200 responses from across the region, just finding out what people were interested in and what their background was, and how they were connected to the Netherlands. And it was really an interesting mix of immigrants, children of immigrants, people who had family connections there, some who had personal interest, mix of people who are fluent in Dutch, but also some who are beginner, intermediate, and some with none. So we have to think about programming across that. People were interested in the lectures, friendships, opportunities to learn or speak Dutch, the cultural identity. And we saw that the age range was, there were about 50% was in the older range, but we did see 50% under the age of 59. And in fact, 30% in their 20s, 30s, and 40s who responded, and they were interested in intergenerational programming. By the way, Tom, 50% love to listen to podcasts. We can keep increasing that as well.
Okay.
And they wanted to see a mix of media, from talks to consul general events to films, music, artists, across lots of topics. And for us to partner with other organizations like the Writers Fest, the Film Festival, the Folk Festival, the Art Gallery, and with other Dutch clubs. So there was a real interest and a spread across the region. And we were also very interested to find out that there was a lot of interest in history and in other topics like art and travel and food and film and literature and science. And we've been really thinking, and environment and development, which is my field. I run an environmental organization. And so we've been able to actually craft more programming that fits some of the interests that people have in. For example, we ran a series on climate change, and more recently have also been diving into the discussions both in Canada and Netherlands on decolonization and slavery. And so those were of interest to many people, and we were able to kind of dive into those as well.
Yeah, that's interesting because you mentioned, and I'd taken note of that when I looked at your website. You say Canada deals with reconciliation, and the Dutch, of course, struggle with how to tell the story of colonialism, their role in the slave trade. Amsterdam wouldn't be as beautiful a city as it is without the slave trade. So, can you tell me a little bit more about how that has progressed with the work you're doing?
I think, well, last year we had a talk with Pepijn van Brandon from the Vrije Universiteit from Amsterdam, and he really talked about how Nederland is trying to reckon with this. And, even just the fact that I think 3% of the GDP of the Netherlands right now is connected to slavery wealth that was accumulated. So it's easy to say, oh, well, it's something that happened in the past. That's sort of what we hear in Canada also. Oh, the issue of colonialism, it happened in the past. We don't have to do anything about it. But in fact, colonialism as we know it now is still functioning in Canada. So we can see reflexively as Dutch Canadians those complexities. The fact that when you think about the high school graduation rates in Canada, the Indigenous students are the lowest. If you look at Nederland, the lowest graduation rates are the Afro-Caribbean, the Dutch Caribbean immigrants. So those types of things we would be structural. Those are not just coincidental, those are actually structural. Those are outcomes of social policies that don't work. And I think we know from our own professional work, I do urban planning, we can see who fits in and succeeds in society. We can see who doesn't. And an interesting thing we were thinking about is how Canada as a country is reconciling. And, Stephen Harper made the apology in 2014. Well, in 2022, the Dutch Prime Minister made the apology in 2022. So we're on parallel paths. And I think there's a fascinating opportunity for both cultures, both societies to share teachings about this work.
Yeah, we just
And that-
hosted a webinar called From the King's Apology to Accountability, of profiling the King Willem-Alexander apology and diving into it in a little bit more detail with Professor Dr. Alex Stupjan van Stupjan Lucius from the Erasmus University Rotterdam, who wrote about Rotterdam and slavernij, and with Sylvia Vollenhoven, who's a playwright and artist from South Africa, where they're also really looking at these issues. And to be honest, Tom, it's also an area that's very close to my heart because my great grandmother was a slave brought over from Ghana. Her name was Onicha de Federici, and she ended up becoming free she was at the Alliance plantation and was made free by her her plantation owner who she had relations with. And I am the direct descendant of that couple. Their last name Flew, which is my mom's last name. And so I've stood on that plantation in Suriname. I've thought about the journey she made and the journey that my ancestors made since then. And so, and thinking exactly what Irwin's saying about how it's still very alive today in terms of the inequalities that we're experiencing and the work that we still have for redress, in fact. So yeah, we've definitely been diving into it. It's historical, it's personal, and it's present day just as much as it is about these historical tragic events.
Absolutely, and that's very interesting because we've seen the Netherlands and Canada sort of move in lockstep ever since the end of World War II, when many Canadian soldiers, of course, were helped liberate the Netherlands from the Nazis, and ever since then, with the immigration wave of the 50s. But now in new areas, one area we've covered extensively in the magazine, for example, is water management. And we've seen work in Toronto on the waterfront there that's been supported. Now you also see that in the approach to reconciliation. So that's great. Those are heavy, tough subjects, but you also do fun stuff, right? Can you talk a little bit about the street market you're planning?
Sure. Well, and I think we're also, I think those academic and historical issues can also be fun because we try to also bring a beetje gezelligheid with when we do these types of programming. So lectures.
So gezelligheid survives whatever you do, right?
Exactly, because it's bringing people together, and that's what's so awesome. And the technology, like I think we've produced probably now 50 different events in the last 3 or 4 years. So And we also, like you, want to make sure that these are accessible. So the Pepin Brandon conversation we did last year now is up on YouTube, so people can access those programs, and they don't need to be in Vancouver. They can be anywhere across North America. So the street market is really an evolution of these ideas that we want to take public space. We want to find the duchies. We want to find the folks out in the community. So when we have an occupation of Granville Street, which is the big commercial hub in downtown Vancouver, Pacific Center is here, the Granville Street SkyTrain, and we take over a whole city block with the sponsorship of the Downtown Vancouver Business Improvement Association, who want to see shoppers come downtown in the summertime. So there's a whole incentive program that we're participating in. And we were invited by the Taiwan Festival, which is themselves thinking about history. And every year they're a big organized community, and they partner with a different country. So Indonesia, Japan. This year they chose Nederlands. And it's interesting because, when I grew up, I always knew that word Formosa, but now I know Formosa is actually the Dutch colony when the Dutch occupied Taiwan for several decades in the 17th century. So Taiwan is having this conversation with Nederland, trying to figure out their history. And we have this invitation. So we've done some beautiful programming, cello concert, film screenings, DJ events, all in the big Vancouver downtown plaza at the Vancouver Art Gallery. And next to it, we have a full city block street party with DJs, stroopwafel stand, tulip bulb stand, flower market. So we're taking over the downtown Vancouver in a way that, is it a cosmopolitan Dutch market? Well, it's still in Vancouver, but we're trying our best to make it a fun Nederland style street market.
So when is this? Just so people in the bigger sort of Greater Vancouver area and BC can know where to go, and Washington State.
Yeah, so September, it's the Labor Day weekend, so it's a great chance to come up. And like I said, there's programming that takes place in and around the street market. So you can come down and watch a film and then hang out at the street market, or you can meet the consul general. He'll be there, chat with him one-on-one, or ask him anything. So there's that opportunity to kind of connect with people, and buy some tulip bulbs, stock up for the fall, get your planting done early.
Pick up a copy of Dutch the magazine. If I just shipped you a few hundred copies, so feel free to hand those out.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Dutch bikes, so different retail and wholesalers. There's a lot of, as I mentioned, agritech. So we're partnering with Van Noort, the big bulb producer and distributor out here in the West Coast. So yeah, it'll be fun. Get a chance to spend some money. Dutchlicious, of course, the very awesome food producer for many events across the Lower Mainland will be there as well. Dutchlicious provides great hot food and puts up frites, so you can get your friet fix on as well. And then it runs Labor Day weekend, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, from 11 a.m. till 7 p.m. So lots of time to check in and wander around downtown Vancouver and meet some other Dutch people.
And there's
so this is on Granville Street, right?
600 block on Granville Street. That's right. And if you're there the evening of the 2nd of September, you'll also see my partner, who's a Dutch cellist, Dutch-Canadian cellist, actually, Diederik van Dijk, partnering up with a media artist from Taiwan, Taiwanese-Canadian, Sammy Chen, on the main stage. It's free, it's open, it's right near where the street market is going to be. They'll be playing from 6 till 7 with this amazing cello and light show. And Irwin's also speaking on Sunday at 1 o'clock within the Vancouver Art Gallery in the courtroom there about some of these historical reflections that we were just talking about today. So there's lots of wonderful things that will be happening at this event.
Okay, and this is well, how long have you been doing this with Dutch BC?
We have been organized as a group for since COVID. So when COVID started, we started wanting to organize events on Zoom. So we produced a few dozen events on Zoom. And then because we wanted to access, be able to take over a city street and do things that require kind of contemporary legal structures, like a nonprofit society, we incorporated, and then we separated from the Cons Network, which is a national network based out of Eastern Canada, created our own nonprofit society so we can actually do, because I think in this day and age, you can't really be handling money and doing things in public without nonprofit structure. So that's when we became the Dutch Cultural Association of BC, just to sort of reflect that that mandate of producing a diversity of cultural events and bring them out to the public.
So yeah, where I was going with that question is, you're really brand new. You've been around for a few years, 2-3 years, but you've already put on a whole lot of events. I mean, organizing lots of things. It seems like you've got momentum. So the street market is a big outdoor event. What will we see in the future after this?
Well, I think we do like doing also symposia, and so I think I think this conversation between Nederland and Canada is going to continue. This research story, because I think we've only started as a Dutch community here out in British Columbia. We had the community raised about $150,000 in the 1970s to build a carillon next to the Victoria, the Royal BC Museum, the Empress, and the legislature. So there's a real big Dutch piece of architecture right in downtown Victoria. When that carillon was built, it's my understanding from our elders in the community that we spent that money on the carillon, but we didn't spend money next on building a community center, a cultural center for our community. So it's interesting to think about and reflects on the history of where we came as a community. It's also even the decade before that, what we call in Canadian society the 60s scoop, where tens of thousands of Indigenous children were adopted by families. It's our understanding that the Dutch community and the German community were the largest immigrant community to adopt First Nations children away from their First Nations families and communities. So that's an interesting bit of research we can do and study in the future, is maybe have an art exhibition with Indigenous artists from Canada who were raised by Dutch families. This has never been thought.
I didn't know that. You're telling me this for the first time, and that those types of stories need to be told. So thank you for raising that, and thank you for looking into that as well.
I think it's a chance for us to grow up as an immigrant community and to think about ourselves in Canadian society and not just say, oh, well, we came and we assimilated, end of story. We come together for, once or twice a year. So I think there's an opportunity to mature as a community in Canada, as an immigrant community, and to participate, not just memorializing. Like my father was ondergedoopt in the end of, he walked away from Amsterdam in the Hongerwinter, right? So my daughter was wanting to learn about her opa's story. These are stories that we'd have no control of when we want to understand them and learn from them. So my daughter and her generation wants to learn about World War II in a way that matters to them, not just in a memorializing World War II, which we often do, like Nederland, Canada, it's one story, end of story. But what happened to the Canadian soldiers that came back to Canada? There's 3,000 Indigenous soldiers that fought to liberate Western Europe. They came back to Canada as second-class citizens. Well, that story was never told. Or when Nederland was free, then they continued their occupation of Indonesia and killed tens of thousands of people. So that story only came out a few years ago, when 50 years after certain government documents get released. So the Pacific Wars, the occupation and freedom of Indonesia, that's a story that we also have to hear more about. So it's about asking questions as a society.
Well, and the large Indonesian community on the West Coast in particular, with the ties with the Netherlands that are there. I'm thinking mainly in California, but also in the Lower Mainland, in and around Vancouver.
Yeah, and I think we're open. Like we have a film screening today in Vancouver that we're presenting. There's stories that are there that we haven't really embraced. And I'm thinking specifically, to Vanessa's point earlier, that there's stories that often are not considered Dutch stories, but those are the Netherlandic diaspora. Those are the stories from Indonesia that are not just the stories about World War II liberation and a liberal democracy flourishing in the future. That there's complexity to those stories, and we want to celebrate all the communities' stories. We want the community to be robust, inclusive, and that's a beautiful opportunity, because what it does, it's coming together. It's expanding who is connected to Dutch heritage, and that doesn't necessarily have to always be a happy, simple story about honoring the king and honoring the queen. It can also be having complexities of having debates about Dutch history. And that's what is happening in Nederland today. And we want to celebrate the Dutch DJs. We want to celebrate the Dutch authors, the Dutch filmmakers, but also the filmmakers from Suriname, from Indonesia, from the diaspora, and who also bring in those stories and that richness of being Dutch in BC.
Fantastic. Yeah. Talking about Dutch in BC a little bit, most Dutch people settled in the Lower Mainland. Of course, it's also the most densely populated part of British Columbia, Fraser Valley in particular. But there's also pockets of Dutch settlers, immigrants in northern BC, in and around Smithers, for example. I'm based right now out in the Kootenays, which is, for people listening from elsewhere, a 10-hour drive from Vancouver, from where you are at the moment. Do you see any opportunity to expand into the rest of the province and the rest of the region?
I think it depends. We work on a partnership and model as well. So we partner with the Vancouver Film Festival, the Vancouver Writers Festival. So we have different partnerships. We're also connected. I'm an associate with the Simon Fraser University Institute for Humanities. So we do, part of our modeling is to answer your earlier question, Tom, about what we're doing and how we're doing it. We do rely on these partnerships. And so that's one way to expand, is to think strategically. Is the university in Kamloops or is UNBC in Prince George, are there opportunities to connect with speaker series or academics who may be situated, visiting those universities and want to have a partner to present film screenings or to do book launches. So we'll do that kind of organically, I think. And we also invite folks. One thing we realized, to sort of answer your question, but even on a bigger level, we realized since the Dutch embassy in Ottawa 10 years ago stopped doing the cultural attaché, they had a staff person who used to be a cultural attaché. Remco Volmer, who still lives in Ottawa, and Remco, like myself personally, has done professional cultural production work. So in my personal life, I do urban planning, but I also produce festivals and cultural events. We recognize that there's Dutch government-sponsored artists, filmmakers, authors coming to North America all the time that used to be facilitated by the cultural attaché staff people through the embassy. And we recognize that there's a gap here where those artists and thinkers are coming to Canada and don't have that infrastructure across Canada. So we're speaking with cultural producers in Toronto and Ottawa and Montreal, recognizing that there's opportunities to cooperate and collaborate when there's artists and authors doing book tours, that there's a community partner in place to help them land and to actually leverage those opportunities, leverage that funding that might come from a travel grant from the Dutch government, but then they have a community partner, and so that we can actually bring them to more places across Canada, because there's that missing middle, there's that missing infrastructure to connect Dutch people who are coming to Canada with these audiences that we want to mobilize.
Yeah, and I think there's also, like, Irwin and I both have connections back to the Netherlands. So in addition to running my environmental nonprofit, I also am a senior research fellow at Utrecht University, and Irwin likewise has a connection back to the Netherlands. So it's also not just the ones that are coming, but the ones that we can bring out because of their expertise and their interest. We've also found there's a lot of students who come to Canada, young people who want to immigrate here. And so connecting with them as well across the Kootenays, they come to different places also for Canada and the nature and people, and they're really interested in being here, and so creating a programming and partnerships with those communities as well. And Tom, you do such a great job with the content with the Dutch the magazine, because you're really bridging across different communities that, as Irwin says, at the moment we have some weaving to do to all of us to really connect that community with each other.
And that's the thing, right? We're so dispersed. I've been in Cranbrook for 6 weeks now, and Cranbrook is not one of the places, the Kootenays, not one of the places where a lot of Dutch people typically settled. But I've met so many Dutch people already, and you're right across the spectrum. A young Parks Canada employee who came here from Vancouver Island to work for Parks Canada here in the beautiful interior of British Columbia. Last night, a friend of mine that I know here in Cranbrook invited me over, and he had invited 3 Dutch couples, and we had a potluck with Dutch and Dutch Indonesian food, and there's still that some connection that people want to make. So it's fantastic what you're doing. Maybe by conclusion, tell people where we can find out more about you, and particularly, I want to remind people of the street market on Labor Day, right in downtown Vancouver. And that sounds like that's going to be a fantastic weekend with the events also on the fringes, right? Like the talk you're doing, Irwin, the cello concert. Sounds like a great event, and I hope that you'll be able to do that on an annual basis, because I saw in your documentation you said this is the inaugural street market. Well, that means you're going to have more.
That's it. And I'm doing the same talk in Toronto on the weekend before. So at Taiwan Festival Toronto, they've invited a Dutch program. So folks in Toronto can check that out.
Okay, tell me a little more about that. When and where?
Yeah, it's at Harbourfront. So check out the program on Saturday the 26th at Harbourfront, which is down on the waterfront in Toronto. So there's 2 days of programming. There's also the Dutch Destination book, which is stories of 10. I don't know if you've had this on your podcast, but 10 Canadian Dutch Canadians.
I was going to mention it because, of course, Irwin, I recognize your name from that book. I've got the book. It's strip book, comic book, and you tell me. Yeah, you're in it. You tell me about it.
Yeah, the Dutch consulate in Toronto produced it, and it features the top 10 graphic artists from the Netherlands. So these are very, very senior graphic artists. So we think about that as cartooning, but it's called graphic arts. And the Dutch consulate in Toronto selected 10 Dutch Canadians. I was honored to be one of them. So I was able to tell the story about my parents coming over, their relationship to Canada, my growing up into that situation. And it's told in beautiful cartoon style, and the book is published. So we'll be sharing those out into the public, both at Harbourfront as part of Taiwan Festival, as they look back at Formosa and their relationship to Nederland. And we'll also show that at the street market in Vancouver. So it's a very cool book. It's in Dutch and English. And so that's on the weekend of the 26th, 27th at Harbourfront in Toronto. And then in Vancouver, as part of the street market will get about 75,000 people just wandering through the streets. So even just 3% of those 75,000, that's a lot of Dutch people. Even who aren't even responding to the postcards. If you go to all the Dutch stores in the Lower Mainland, you'll see our postcards and ways to connect. Instagram, dutch.bc on Instagram, the website, dutchbc.ca. So there's lots of ways for folks to follow us and join along. And I think we're even, if you follow us on Instagram at dutch.bc, you show us your phone, and we'll give you a stroopwafel when you show up on Granville Street.
Okay, well, I'll have to take the 10-hour drive and come out there. I really don't want to miss this. Vanessa, Irwin, thank you so much for joining us on Dutch the podcast. And I'm sure this is not going to be the end of our relationship. I hope we'll be able to do a lot of things together in the future.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, great work you're doing, and thank you for having us.
Thanks.
Well, keeping Dutch culture alive and so much more. What a fascinating meetup you had there in Vancouver.
Yeah, I really enjoyed talking to those guys.
So now, do you think you'll make the trip for free? I heard free stroopwafel, and I know you're 10 hours away. You're going to make the drive, aren't you?
I am probably going to make the drive, It's very tempting. And you know what? We're handing out free copies of Dutch the Magazine and of the newspaper, the Krant. So people don't just go for the stroopwafels, pick up a copy of our magazine as well. And once you've seen it, I hope you will go to dutchthemedia.com and subscribe. Every 2 months, we publish a magazine. And of course, comments on the podcast, suggestions for topics.
Yeah.
Go to dutchthemedia.com and use the contact form.
Now, Tom, I don't want you to forget, there's a very good book I want you to check out, Hiding in Plain Sight by a good friend of mine, Tom Bivoot. And you can get your copy today at dutchthemedia.com.
Thanks for mentioning that, Mike.
My pleasure, bud. Now, listen, please subscribe to the show. Don't forget to tell a friend and all of your Dutch friends, expatriates, folks back home in Holland, in the Netherlands. It would be ideal for you to help us grow this so that we can get more stories, have more connections, and bring you more fascinating people. That's the mission with Dutch the podcast. Between here and there, Tom, you take care of yourself. Enjoy the mountains.
Thank you. See you, Mike.